Hey, welcome again to another episode of the Phil Files Christian Edition. Today, we're going to dive deep into a pivotal message from the Bible, Genesis 1 through 5. This foundational text sets the stage for the entire biblical narrative and is rich with theological and symbolic imagery. So, let's begin with a background of Genesis. It's fascinating to think that Genesis, traditionally attributed to Moses, is part of the Pentateuch, but modern scholarship often sees it as a composite text, likely compiled during the Babylonian exile. This opening passage introduces the priestly account of creation with a structured, formulaic style. It really emphasizes God's sovereignty. And the linguistic analysis really is just as intriguing. The Hebrew text starts with Bereshit, translated as in the beginning. It's more than just a theological marker. It's loaded with theological significance, marking the initiation of time and creation. In other words, before this, there was no time. Now there is time. Before this, there was no creation. Now, there is creation. And then there's the Hebrew word bara, meaning created. That's used to denote divine creation ex nihilo, or out of nothing. It underscores God's sole agency in the creative act. And don't forget the phrase Elohim, a plural noun used with singular verbs. The grammatical construct has puzzled scholars for ages. It suggests a very complex unity that aligns with the later Christian theological developments like the Trinity. And some people actually think that it goes much broader than that and extends to all of those in the heavenlies. But in its original context, it emphasizes God's majesty and unparalleled authority. Now, the cultural context is just as compelling. The Genesis creation narrative reflects ancient Near Eastern cosmologies, but it stands out with a very monotheistic focus. Unlike the other cultures, which had polytheistic myths, where creation often resulted from divine conflict, Genesis presents a singular, omnipotent deity creating through speech. It's almost like a theological polemic against surrounding cultures, asserting the supremacy of Israel's God. Now, moving on to imagery and this idea of semiotics, light and darkness play significant roles in these verses. Light is introduced as the first act of creation, and it symbolizes life, order, and divine presence. And darkness represents chaos and the absence of God's order. That dichotomy is a recurring biblical theme where light is associated with goodness and revelation. And the separation of light from darkness has ritualistic and moral connotations, reflecting the Hebrew understanding of holiness as separation. It really begins that demarcation of sacred and profane in the Levitical law. And the structure is quite fascinating as well. It's highly ordered, mirroring the creation that it describes. The repetition of phrases like, and God said, and there was, and God saw it was good, creates a rhythm that underscores the orderliness of creation. that repetition, it not only aids in understanding and memorization, but it reinforces the authority and intentionality behind it. Now, the power of the divine word is another significant concept here. It's a theme resonating throughout biblical literature, culminating in the Gospel of John, where Christ is identified as the Logos, the divine word made flesh. Now, let's talk about theology. These verses lay the groundwork for the doctrine of creation, affirming that the universe was brought into being by God's will. This counters both the ancient and the modern materialistic views, positioning creation as intentional and purposeful, with God as the sovereign architect. Now, we can't overlook God's nature, which is implicitly depicted as both transcendent and immanent. The act of creation signifies God's transcendence, existing outside and independent of creation. Yet, shaping the cosmos shows how God, who is intimately involved and concerned with the details, truly cares about the way things are. The goodness of creation is also that reoccurring affirmation, and it highlights the inherent goodness of the world, particularly in how it was created from the beginning. And it's a hint to the way things will be in the new heavens and the new earth. It's a reflection also of God's character, and it sets a paradigm for ethical living, calling humanity to steward the earth responsibly. And speaking of stewardship, let's talk about the present cultural implications. These verses have been revisited in light of environmental concerns. The depiction of God as the creator of a good world implies a human responsibility to care for creation, aligning with the concept of stewardship. Now, all that's a timely discussion with the intersection of science and religion. Some people see a conflict, but others find a complementary relationship, interpreting the Genesis narrative as a theological rather than a scientific concept. It allows for dialogue where scientific discoveries enrich theological understandings of creation's complexity and order. And in terms of cultural identity, Genesis 1 through 5 continues to shape both religious and cultural identities. It grounds human existence in a divine purpose. It's a counter narrative to this nihilistic or purely materialistic worldview. It asserts that life is imbued with meaning and direction and purpose. And these verses also provide common ground for interfaith dialogue. Because the Jews, Christians, and Muslims all value the Hebrew Scriptures. And this shared text can foster mutual understanding and respect, emphasizing shared beliefs about God's role as the Creator. Now, to wrap up, Genesis 1 through 5 is a profound text that has shaped theological thought, cultural identity, and ethical perspectives for centuries, millennia even. It shows us a very high level of a polemic against ancient myths. And its imagery and semiotics underscore themes of order and divine sovereignty. And theologically, it affirms God's transcendence, God's immanence, the goodness of creation, the intentionality of divine will. And in our contemporary culture, it continues to inspire discussions on environmental ethics, science, religion, and interfaith relations. And it demonstrates their enduring relevance and depth. So I hope you'll take a fresh look at Genesis 1 1 through 5.